Now, it's no secret that the Indiana front office is very in tune to what be going on this said social media, bro.
The Indiana Fever have been the center of nonstop headlines this season, but no moment captured attention quite like when front office executive Amber Cox decided she had heard enough from critics online. In an era where most executives keep their heads down and avoid direct confrontation, Cox went the opposite route. With a single tweet, she lit up social media, silenced doubters, and turned fan conversations upside down.
Now, Amber Cox kind of broke her silence on the matter just recently about the team and reading the comments that are surfacing online. Now, a lot of people was kind of, Amber, you shouldn't be reading the comments. I look at it like this. It's her team. It's her way to kind of be engaged with what the fans want.
What made it so powerful wasn't just the words, but the timing coming right after relentless claims that the Fever were sabotaging Caitlin Clark or failing to run the team properly. For weeks, fans and reporters filled comment sections with accusations, questions, and mockery. Instead of ignoring it, Cox clapped back, sparking a firestorm of reactions that carried across Twitter, YouTube, and WNBA circles. Her tweet wasn't just a reply, it became a statement of defiance, and it shook the entire conversation.
She's been kind of tweeting. Now, one thing I would say about Amber Cox is that she's definitely going to she gonna speak online, bro. And just like I said earlier, man, she's from my home state. She's from the show me state, and we gonna stand on business.
Amber Cox has never been the type to blend into the background, but even longtime Fever fans were surprised when she finally decided to respond to the wave of criticism surrounding the Indiana Fever for weeks. The team's struggles and the constant speculation about Caitlin Clark's status had fueled a frenzy online. Fans were frustrated, the media was circling, and YouTube creators were dissecting every rumor. Most executives in professional sports ignore that noise, acting as though they're immune to the chatter. But Cox, she took a different approach.
This right here, Amber Cox says, "Thanks, I see all of it, the good and the bad. I've got no issue with any of it. I could take it. At the end of the day, all the opinions and chatter mean people are invested and passionate about this team. Go Fever, on to the semis."
She made it clear she was not only paying attention, she was reading every single comment. Her admission instantly set social media ablaze. Some fans loved the transparency. They saw it as proof that the front office wasn't hiding in some ivory tower, disconnected from the people who buy tickets, wear jerseys, and keep the Fever brand alive. Others thought it was reckless. An executive shouldn't be reading comments, critics argued. But to Cox, acknowledging the conversation was about more than just damage control. It was about respect. If fans cared enough to comment good or bad, then she felt obligated to at least see what they were saying.
This comment right here is letting us know they're invested in watching what is going on social media.
The timing of her response also made it even more impactful. Caitlin Clark's absence had left a massive hole in both the team's lineup and its marketing engine. Every update, or lack thereof, was fueling new theories. Was the front office hiding information? Was the coaching staff mishandling Clark's injury? Why weren't players given clearer updates? These were the questions dominating the timeline, and instead of letting them fester, Cox leaned right into the storm.
And this is Amber letting you know she sees it. She respects it. She respects everybody's opinion. I love this. I just truly do.
Her tweet was short, but cutting, essentially telling critics that she saw everything and wasn't backing down. For many, this was a refreshing change. Sports fans are used to carefully worded press releases and PRA-approved statements that dodge controversy at all costs. Cox's willingness to speak in raw, direct language felt authentic. It reminded people that behind the titles and corporate roles are real individuals with pride, emotion, and a deep connection to their team. Cox isn't just an executive crunching numbers in a quiet office. She's from Missouri, a place she proudly says taught her to stand on business. That cultural backbone shaped her response, giving it weight beyond a simple social media post.
But where we come from, we can't do that. We stand on business. And Amber Cox is a Missouri native. She's standing on business.
Still, her openness raised a bigger question. How should sports executives engage with fans in the age of constant online commentary? If they say nothing, they're accused of being if they clap back, they're told they're unprofessional. Cox walked that tightrope and made her stance clear. The Fever are listening, even when the conversation gets messy. And while some saw it as a bold move, others warned it might come back to haunt her if the team couldn't deliver on the court, but Cox wasn't worried about the optics. By showing she was watching and willing to respond, she turned the criticism into proof that the Fever mattered. And that was just the beginning.
And I love this. I like this. This is great. This is great. So for all of the people that say people with this and that, oh, they are haters, they shouldn't address. No, you addressed it because y'all like it when Sophie do it. Y'all like it when Sophie address stuff. Y'all like it, you know what I'm saying, when certain people dressed up. She's like when I dress old boy from Ireland, y'all be mad. No, it's the same thing. Same thing. It's where we from. It's the culture where we live. We stand by principles and morals.
Once Amber Cox admitted she was reading the comments, the reaction was immediate and fierce. Social media thrives on drama, and the idea of a WNBA executive scrolling through Twitter, digesting every insult and conspiracy theory, was too juicy for fans and critics to ignore. Some applauded her for having the courage to face the fire, while others doubled down, saying it only proved how thin-skinned the Fever front office really was. Instead of calming the storm, her tweet poured gasoline on it. The criticism Cox responded to was brutal and at times personal. Fans accused her and head coach Stephanie White of sabotaging Caitlin Clark by keeping her sidelined longer than necessary. Others suggested the front office was incompetent, more worried about optics than wins. A few even claimed the Fever had no real plan beyond riding Clark's star power. In most cases, executives would issue a sterile statement through a PR team. But Cox had taken the fight directly to the people. The backlash was proof that her words hit a nerve. What stood out most was the split among Fever supporters themselves. Some fans argued that Cox was showing the type of accountability they had been begging for. They felt seen. They believed that if she was reading the comments, then their frustrations weren't being shouted into the void. But another camp saw it differently. They believed her engagement validated the trolls and gave credibility to the harshest critics. To them, an executive of her stature should be above the noise, not wading through it. Cox's Missouri roots added another layer to the debate. She and her supporters framed her approach as standing on business, a phrase that resonated with many Midwestern fans who admired her toughness. They drew comparisons to Sophie Cunningham, another Missouri native known for her no-nonsense attitude and fiery presence on the court. It wasn't just about basketball anymore. It was about culture, values, and the pride of where you're from. But critics countered that basketball is a business first, and executives should act with detachment rather than emotion. Meanwhile, rival fan bases seized on the controversy as proof that Indiana's front office was cracking under pressure. Memes and sarcastic posts flooded timelines, mocking the Fever for letting Twitter dictate their decisions. Reporters even began chiming in, noting how rare it was for executives to acknowledge online chatter so openly. What was meant as a show of strength quickly turned into a public trial. With Cox at the center of it all, and yet Cox didn't backpedal, she made it clear she respected all opinions, positive and negative, because, at least it showed, people were invested in the Fever. That line struck a chord with some fans who had long felt ignored by professional sports franchises. But it also fueled skeptics who believed she was spinning criticism into validation. The social media backlash proved one thing beyond doubt. The Fever weren't just another team in the league anymore. Every move was under a microscope. And just when it seemed like the tension couldn't escalate further, another voice entered the conversation. Lynn Dunn, and she wasn't about to stay quiet. Amber Cox lighting up critics online was enough to get people buzzing. But the situation reached an entirely new level when Lynn Dunn decided to jump in. Dunn, a veteran voice in women's basketball and a key figure within the Indiana Fever organization, is not someone who normally plays around on social media. Her words carry weight. So when she fired off her response, fans and reporters immediately knew the conversation had shifted. Dunn wasn't coming in to smooth things over. She wanted to challenge the doubters head-on. Her tweet was sharp and dripping with sarcasm. She pointed out that the only one who predicted the Fever's playoff victory was Croy the dog on Yahoo Sports. Everyone else, from respected analysts to dedicated WNBA insiders, had picked Indiana to lose. The implication was clear. All those experts who dismissed the Fever were eating crow now, and Dunn wanted the world to know it. She wasn't subtle about it either. She tagged names, shared receipts, and made sure fans could see exactly who had counted the Fever out. The reaction was instant. Some fans loved it. They saw Dunn's clapback as proof the Fever were sick of being underestimated. They cheered her boldness, praising her for putting media members on blast and defending the team's grit. After all, the Fever weren't just any squad this year. They were the team carrying Caitlin Clark's star power and the hopes of a growing fan base. For supporters, Dunn's tweet felt like a rallying cry. But others weren't so impressed. Reporters bristled at being called out, arguing that predictions are part of sports coverage and not personal attacks. By mocking them, Dunn had blurred the line between playful banter and professional decorum. To critics, it made the Fever look thin-skinned and defensive, unable to handle legitimate criticism. The exchange also gave rival fan bases another chance to mock Indiana, claiming the front office was more concerned with Twitter battles than building a championship team. Yet, Dunn's approach resonated with the Fever's most loyal base. Her message wasn't just about basketball, it was about respect. For too long, Indiana had been treated like an afterthought in the WNBA, overlooked and dismissed by the national media. With Clark sidelined, many thought the Fever had no chance. Dunn's words flipped that narrative, turning the underdog storyline into one of defiance and pride. By calling out analysts directly, she wasn't just defending the Fever's record, she was defending their identity. What made the moment even more explosive was how seamlessly Dunn's stance aligned with Cox's. While Cox emphasized that the front office sees and respects fan commentary, Dunn took the fight straight to the so-called experts. Together, their voices sent a powerful message. Indiana wasn't going to hide, wasn't going to stay quiet, and definitely wasn't going to let critics write their story. But while Dunn's fiery tweets electrified Fever fans, they also highlighted the elephant in the room, the ongoing questions about Caitlin Clark's injury and the front office's lack of transparency. And that issue was about to take center stage. For all the noise created by Amber Cox and Lynn Dunn's fiery social media presence, the storm swirling around the Fever wasn't just about banter with fans and critics. At its core, the controversy came down to one issue: Caitlin Clark's injury and the way the team handled it. From the moment Clark was sidelined with what was described as a groin injury, questions started piling up. Was it serious? Would she return in time for the postseason? Why did the updates feel so vague and inconsistent? Instead of clarity, the front office's messaging only deepened the confusion. Fans were told Clark was day-to-day. That phrase, repeated again and again, became a source of frustration. Each game that passed without her return chipped away at trust. Supporters who were counting on her to lead the Fever into the playoffs felt misled. Worse still, rumors spread that even her teammates weren't sure what was really going on. When players inside the locker room are left in the dark, the outside world takes that as a sign that leadership is withholding the truth. Comparisons made the situation look even worse. Breanna Stewart, who was battling a more serious injury, had already made her return while Clark remained inactive. Fans drew their own conclusions. If Stewart was back, why wasn't Caitlin? The speculation exploded across Twitter and YouTube, with theories ranging from the team protecting her for future seasons to whispers of an internal disagreement about whether she should be playing at all. The biggest blow came when it was revealed that Clark had been deactivated from the active roster for the playoffs. That decision meant that even if her injury improved, she couldn't play. Fans felt blindsided. Why hadn't the organization been upfront about this from the beginning? Many believed the front office knew as early August that Clark wouldn't return. Yet they continued to string along the narrative of day-to-day recovery. The lack of transparency turned what could have been a tough but understandable medical decision into a lightning rod of controversy. This failure in communication had consequences far beyond social media criticism. It eroded the bond between the Fever and their most passionate supporters. Instead of rallying behind the team through a difficult stretch, many fans turned skeptical, believing they were being misled. The criticism wasn't just about Clark's injury, it was about honesty, respect, and accountability. For a franchise banking so heavily on Clark's star power, the optics were devastating. Cox and Dunn's tweets may have showcased defiance, but they couldn't erase the fact that fans felt betrayed. Transparency wasn't just a PR strategy in this case, it was the foundation of trust between the Fever and their base. By mishandling the injury narrative, the front office opened the door for conspiracy theories and fueled resentment that lingers even now. And while this transparency problem threatened to overshadow everything, it also set the stage for a larger conversation. How much damage had this done to the Fever's relationship with their fans, and could it ever be repaired? The Caitlin Clark injury saga was more than a medical issue. It became a test of trust between the Indiana Fever and their fan base. Trust, once shaken, is incredibly difficult to rebuild. And by the time news broke that Clark had been deactivated for the playoffs, many supporters felt outright deceived. The day-to-day updates that once gave hope now felt like deliberate misdirection. For fans who had invested not only their money, but also their passion and loyalty into this team, the revelation hit like a betrayal. In professional sports, transparency is currency. Fans will accept bad news if it's delivered honestly. They'll understand a tough loss, a season-ending injury, or a front office decision that doesn't immediately make sense so long as they believe the organization is being truthful with them. But when communication feels manipulative, everything shifts. Instead of seeing the Fever as partners in the journey, many began viewing them as gatekeepers, withholding the truth. That perception spread across Twitter, YouTube comment sections, and fan forums like wildfire. What made matters worse was the context surrounding Clark. She wasn't just another rookie. She was the face of the franchise, the player who had single-handedly elevated ticket sales, TV ratings, and national interest in the WNBA. Her every move was scrutinized, celebrated, and analyzed. So when fans felt they were misled about her availability, it wasn't simply frustration, it was outrage. They believed the organization owed them honesty, given how much Clark had already given to the Fever's growth. This disconnect created space for conspiracy theories to thrive. Some speculated that the team was purposely keeping Clark sidelined to protect her from further injury, but they didn't want to admit it publicly. Others floated darker rumors about tension between Clark and the coaching staff, suggesting there was more going on behind the scenes. Without clear, consistent messaging from the front office, every theory gained traction. The more silence there was, the louder the speculation became. Content creators and independent reporters capitalized on the uncertainty. Amplifying fan frustrations, channels and podcasts debated whether the Fever had sabotaged themselves by failing to be upfront. Every new piece of information, or lack thereof, was treated like a clue in a mystery. The situation spiraled into a public relations crisis, where the team's credibility was on the line. Meanwhile, fans who genuinely wanted to rally behind the Fever felt conflicted. They were torn between supporting the players on the court and questioning the people making decisions off it. For a franchise trying to rebuild its reputation and prove it could contend, this was a dangerous position. Losing games hurts, but losing trust cuts much deeper. Amber Cox's attempts to frame fan passion as a positive, saying criticism means people care, were a step toward damage control, but the underlying issue remained unresolved. Trust is not rebuilt through clever tweets. It takes consistency, honesty, and a willingness to confront mistakes. Until that happens, every move the Fever make will be second-guessed, and as the backlash reached a boiling point, Cox made it clear she wasn't retreating. She doubled down, defending the Fever's culture and trying to reframe the narrative on her own terms. In the middle of the backlash, Amber Cox didn't hide or go silent. Instead, she leaned further into the conversation, trying to shift the tone from frustration to pride. Her most notable response came when she congratulated Caitlin Clark on being inducted into her high school Hall of Fame. To most executives, it might have been a throwaway congratulatory post. But in the context of the swirling criticism, it carried a deeper meaning. It was Cox's way of reminding fans that the Fever were more than their controversies, more than injury drama, and more than the noise on social media. The organization still had culture, values, and pride worth defending. Cox framed the criticism itself as a sign of passion. She said she welcomed both the good and the bad because it meant people cared. That stance was strategic. By spinning negativity into proof of investment, she attempted to reframe the entire narrative. In her view, the harshest critics weren't enemies. They were evidence that the Fever mattered. For a team fighting to establish itself as a centerpiece of the WNBA, that framing was powerful. Still, not everyone bought into it. To skeptics, it felt like a convenient way to dodge accountability. They argued that recognizing fan passion was fine, but it didn't erase the missteps with Caitlin Clark's injury updates or the tension between fans in the front office. But for loyal Fever supporters, Cox's words struck a chord. They wanted to believe the organization valued their voice, and Cox made it clear she did. This wasn't the first time Cox had emphasized culture. She had long pointed to her Missouri roots as a guiding principle, highlighting values like toughness, honesty, and standing on business. That language resonated with Midwestern fans who saw themselves reflected in the team's identity. It wasn't about being perfect, it was about showing grit, even when things got messy. Her defense of the Fever's culture was as much about protecting the organization's image as it was about protecting her own identity as a leader. Cox also reminded the public that the Fever weren't just about one player, even one as transformative as Caitlin Clark. By highlighting Clark's Hall of Fame honor, she tied the Fever to something positive and uplifting, a moment that connected the franchise to Clark's personal journey and legacy. It was a subtle but effective move, celebrating Clark, without wading into the ongoing controversy around her injury status. The message was clear. The Fever would not crumble under criticism. They would embrace it, frame it as passion, and use it to fuel their identity. Cox wasn't trying to silence fans, she was trying to show that the organization could stand tall in the face of scrutiny. But even as she defended the culture, the conversation kept shifting. Rival fan bases weren't impressed, critics stayed vocal, and reporters kept digging, which raised a pressing question. Could the Fever's culture actually withstand the storm? Or was it just a rallying cry, masking deeper cracks? Amber Cox's responses to criticism weren't just about defending the Fever, they were rooted in something deeper, a cultural mindset that she proudly tied to her Missouri upbringing. Over and over, Cox reminded fans and critics alike that in the Midwest, people stand on business. That phrase became a recurring theme, both in her tweets and in the commentary surrounding her. As it framed the Fever's defiance as part of a larger cultural identity rather than just a defensive reaction, the idea of standing on business resonated strongly with Fever fans who grew up in similar environments. It's a mindset that values toughness, accountability, and never backing down, no matter the situation. For Cox, this wasn't simply about managing a basketball franchise. It was about living by principles she considered non-negotiable. If you're challenged, you don't ignore it. You address it directly, even if it sparks more conflict. That's exactly what she did, by openly engaging with fans and critics. Online, the comparison to Sophie Cunningham only amplified this narrative. Cunningham, another Missouri native, has built her reputation on grit and intensity, often clashing with opponents, but earning respect for her unapologetic style. Cox leaned into that connection, positioning the Fever's leadership as cut from the same cloth. This wasn't about polished PR statements, it was about authenticity, even if it ruffled feathers. And for a fan base that had grown tired of feeling misled about Caitlin Clark's injury, authenticity was a currency worth more than anything else. Of course, not everyone interpreted it that way. Critics argued that standing on business sounded more like stubbornness than leadership. They saw Cox's approach as combative, even unprofessional, suggesting that an executive's role should be to diffuse controversy, not inflame it. To them, her Missouri roots explanation felt like an excuse for behavior that only deepened the divide between the front office and the public. But for those who understood the cultural context, her defiance wasn't reckless, was admirable. What made this mentality even more compelling was how it extended beyond Cox herself. It became a rallying point for the Fever's identity. Indiana wasn't just another WNBA franchise. They were a team grounded in Midwestern values of hard work, resilience, and pride. In an era where the league is expanding its audience and trying to capture national attention, the Fever's willingness to tie themselves to a cultural identity gave them a unique voice. The bigger question remained: could standing on business translate into long-term trust and success? Or would it only lead to more clashes with fans and the media? Cox and Dunn clearly believed that authenticity would win out in the end. But in the fast-moving, hypercritical world of sports media, where narratives can shift overnight, the risk of being misunderstood is always high. And just as Cox and Dunn were doubling down on this Midwest defiance, they turned their attention directly to the critics, one last time, issuing a challenge that no one could ignore. By the time the Fever advanced in the playoffs, Amber Cox and Lynn Dunn weren't just responding to critics, they were confronting them directly. Their message was loud and clear. If you doubted Indiana, own it. Don't backtrack. Don't suddenly pretend you were in their corner, and don't try to rewrite history. Cox and Dunn wanted accountability from the very people who had spent weeks mocking the Fever and dismissing their chances. Cox emphasized that respect isn't given, it's earned. But once it's earned, it demands honesty from both sides. If media members and fans predicted losses, she expected them to stand on that prediction instead of quietly shifting their stance once the Fever started winning. That expectation reflected her broader philosophy of principles and morals. In her mind, flipping opinions without acknowledging the past wasn't just dishonest, it was disrespectful. Dunn took an even sharper edge. By pointing to analysts and reporters who had openly picked against Indiana, she forced the conversation into the open. Croy the dog became a running joke, a reminder that the only expert to predict a Fever victory wasn't even human. That jab wasn't just about humor, it was about exposing how little faith the basketball community had in Indiana. For Dunn, calling out those doubters wasn't pettiness, it was vindication. The reaction was polarizing. Fever fans loved it, flooding social media with messages of support, screenshots of old predictions, and memes celebrating Cox and Dunn as fearless defenders of the franchise. For them, the executives were saying what they had been shouting all along: respect us. Critics, however, saw it as unprofessional, arguing that it's not the job of a front office to spar with fans and reporters. But the controversy only fueled the story further, giving the Fever more attention than they could have generated through on-court performance alone. At its core, this call-out wasn't just about basketball, it was about rewriting a narrative. For too long, Indiana had been seen as a bottom-tier team, a franchise stuck in rebuilding mode. With Caitlin Clark's arrival, expectations skyrocketed, but skepticism lingered. By holding critics accountable, Cox and Dunn were forcing the public to acknowledge the progress the Fever had made, both on and off the court. This final act of defiance turned into a challenge. If you doubted us, admit it, and then watch what happens next. It was equal parts warning and promise. Cox and Dunn weren't looking for apologies, they were demanding honesty. And for Fever fans, that demand carried weight. It felt like the organization was finally standing up, not just for the team, but for the entire community of supporters who had endured years of ridicule. But accountability cuts both ways. While Cox and Dunn pushed for critics to own their words, fans still wanted the same transparency from the front office about Caitlin Clark and the direction of the team. That lingering question would define the next chapter. For now, though, the Fever had drawn a line in the sand. Respect us, or stand by your doubts. Amber Cox and Lynn Dunn did more than fire off a few tweets, they ignited a larger debate about respect, transparency, and accountability in women's basketball. By refusing to stay silent, they shifted the spotlight from quiet frustration to open confrontation, challenging both fans and media to stand by their words. For Fever supporters, their defiance felt like validation, a long overdue demand for respect that the franchise had been chasing for years. For critics, it raised questions about professionalism and whether a front office should be this involved in online battles. Either way, the message was impossible to ignore. The Fever see everything, they hear everything, and they're not afraid to respond. But the bigger test still remains. Can this bold stance rebuild lasting trust with fans and deliver results on the court? Or will it only highlight the cracks in leadership when the spotlight grows even brighter?